Hello Fearless Gamers, Matt here for Fearless Games, and welcome to How to Play Battlefleet Gothic Remastered Part 3-B. Before we start this video, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. That way you know when more of these videos come out. Hit that little bell icon so YouTube actually tells you when these videos come out. And give this video a like. That way it gets out there and circulates more. And I can also see what content you guys really want to see. This helps me out greatly with deciding what kind of video content to give to you guys. And like I said, it helps out the channel a lot. And we really appreciate it if you could do that. So, with that out of the way, let's continue with the video. In our last video, we went over checking range on vessels, checking firing arcs, firing lances, firing weapon batteries, firing Nova cannons, and special effect weapons. Today, we're going to be finishing up the shooting phase with going over shields, damage, blast markers. So, let's dive right in. Every vessel is protected by a powerful energy field known as a shield. These allow the ship to travel through space safely. They're capable of absorbing or deflecting various attacks that may threaten the vessel, but they can only take so much damage before the shield generators overload and collapse, leaving the vessel vulnerable. The way we determine how many shields a vessel has is by looking at their data sheet. There is a special entry called shields, and that number represents how many attacks the shields can absorb before the ship actually takes damage. So, a shield value of 1 means the ship can block 1 hit. A shield value of 2 means the ship can block 2 hits, and so on and so forth. The way that we represent when a shield has absorbed an attack is with this token, called a blast marker. For those who need, I'll put a link in the description for a Google Drive that has the old templates GW used to give out for free, so you can print out your own. So if a ship is successfully hit by an attack, if there's no blast markers touching its base, you, instead of dealing damage to the vessel, you would take a blast marker and put it on the ship's base in the direction that the attack came from, or as best as you can. Once there's a number of blast markers that equal the number of shields that the vessel has, it is no longer protected, and the next attack that hits it will direct damage directly to the vessel. So, like in this example here, we have a Gothic class cruiser being attacked by 2 Chaos vessels. The Gothic has 2 shields. So the first Chaos vessel attacks and successfully hits it once. Since there's no blast markers touching this ship, we would take 1 blast marker token and place it down, touching the Gothic base in the direction that the attack came from. Its shield value has now been reduced to 1. Now the second Chaos Cruiser fires on the vessel, and it scores 3 hits. Because it has 1 blast marker touching it, it's only allowed to absorb 1 additional attack. So we'd place 1 blast marker touching the ship's base in the direction that the new attack came from, and now the remaining 2 hits go through and damage the vessel. Now, a ship can regain its shields by moving away from blast markers. And this is instantaneously. As soon as a ship no longer is touching blast markers, its shields immediately go back up and ready to defend the vessel once more. Shields will only protect against lance attacks, Nova cannon, and weapon battery shots. It will not protect against ordnance, fighters and bombers, or ramming attacks. Unless the ship specifically has a special rule that says otherwise, those form of attacks cannot be absorbed by shields. A vessel whose shields have collapsed or has taken a hit from an attack that goes past shields and ignores them starts taking damage. Damage is represented by, for every hit that you suffer, is 1 point of damage to the vessel. And the way you would record this is on your fleet registry list here, there's a section for damage. And you can see here in this image, it starts with 12 boxes, but as we went over in episode 1 of this series, not every vessel has 12 hit points. Some of them have 6, some of them have 4. In the cases of escorts, they have 1. So the way you would do this is you would just block out the numbers that don't apply. So let's just use an Imperial cruiser. Most Imperial cruisers have 8 hit points. So you would block out the 12, the 11, the 10, and the 9, and that is the ship's starting hit points. Then for every hit that they take, you would mark off starting with the 8 and going all the way down to 1. So if it takes 2 hit points, you'd knock off the 8 and the 7, it now has 6. And when a vessel reaches to half their starting hit points, they are considered crippled. Crippled vessels are less effective than non-crippled vessels. So when they get the status of crippled, this means they must have their shield value, have their turret value, have the strength of their ordnance weapons, and have the strength of their weapon battery and lances. And on top of this, if that vessel happens to go under special orders and that special order has the effect that their weaponry strength is halved, it's halved a second time, rounding up in cases of fractions. So, for example, a Gothic class cruiser has a lance battery of 4 on its starboard and port side. That means when it gets crippled, it's now down to 2. And if it goes under brace for impact, it's now down to 1. Crippled vessels also take a -5 hit to their movement. So if their vessel has a movement of 20, it's only allowed to move 15 centimeters. This can have a devastating impact on stuff like battleships, because when we'll get into blast markers later, this could result in them not being able to turn unless they take the burn retro special order and take that free turn that they get to do before they move. And also, any vessel that has a Nova Cannon that gets crippled is no longer allowed to fire it. This is why it is really critical to make sure you're the first one to deal damage to vessels, because with hit point values of like 6, 4, and 8, these ships are going to get crippled really quickly unless your opponent rolls really terribly. And that could change your whole strategy, because a vessel that once had, like, say a Gothic, starts out with 4 lance batteries, next thing you know it may only have 2, and now you have very few chances to get through, drop shields, and deal actual damage, making it much harder to win. When a vessel suffers damage, there is a risk that it could potentially be a critical hit. These are instances where a shot either hits a soft spot in the vessel's armor, doing massive damage to the vessel, or the shot happens to hit a critical system, shutting down a function of the vessel. So the way you determine if a shot is a critical hit is for every damage the vessel is going to suffer, you roll a d6. So if a vessel is going to take 3 damage, you'd roll 3 d6s. Every roll of a 6 is a critical effect you must apply to the vessel. So if you have 3 dice, you roll them and 2 d6 and 2 of them are 6s, you have to roll on the critical damage table twice. And the way you do that is you take 2d6, roll them, and add the totals together and consult this chart. And so you would see with your final result, see if any extra damage is applied to the vessel. So a shot that, say, it has extra damage 1, that means instead of doing 1 damage, the vessel suffers 2 damage. And then see what special effect applies to the vessel. These can range from not being able to use certain armaments in a firing arc, to reducing your movement, preventing you from turning, reducing your leadership, dropping your shields permanently, or dealing mass damage to the vessel. So critical hits are really nasty, and the effects are cumulative, which means if the vessel suffers an effect that can be repaired, which we'll go over in a later video, every instance of that effect being applied to the vessel has to be repaired before it goes away. So if, again, let's just say you suffer 2 critical hits and both end up being fire, that means you have to repair the fire effect twice before you get rid of the effect on the vessel. So yeah, critical hits can be really nasty, and in some cases they could mean the end of a vessel. So now we're in probably the most complex rule in all of the game. That is blast markers. Blast markers represent shockwaves, huge explosions, radiation clouds, debris fields, unexploded warheads, plasma bursts, all the essentially space junk that's floating around on the battlefield that builds up as the battle goes on. And they're represented by this token that we discussed earlier, the blast marker. There are a few instances in the game where you would be placing blast markers down on the table, and the 3 main ones are as follows. Whenever a shield absorbs an attack from a vessel or any other form of attack that comes at the ship that the shields can block, whenever a ship explodes, or whenever a Nova Cannon shot misses. When a ship suffers an attack that is absorbed by the shields, the blast marker should be placed around the direction that the attack came from. And any additional shield absorptions coming from the same attack source would fan out from that original blast marker. So in this example, we've got a Gothic cruiser firing at a Chaos vessel. It manages to hit it 3 times, so the first blast marker is placed down, touching the Chaos vessel's base in the direction the attack came from. Then the second blast marker, because it has 2 shields, would fan out from that original blast marker, touching the edges of the blast marker and the Chaos vessel's base at the same time. Then the third attack would go straight in as damage. In cases where a ship is in base contact with another ship and it gets attacked, the blast markers would fan out in the direction of the closest vessel to the attacking ship. So like in this example, we got a Gothic cruiser, Chaos vessel with 2 Chaos ships touching it. The first blast marker gets placed down on the ship's base. The next one can't go over and try to wrap around to touch the ship that's further away from the Gothic cruiser. It has to fan in the direction towards the ship that's closer to the Gothic vessel. And in any given time, a single ship or squadron can only have blast markers fan out and touch 1 additional ship, with the following exceptions. In cases of ships with multiple shields, like battleships, which can take 3 or 4 blast markers before they start suffering damage, those are instances when you can have blast markers fan out and touch multiple ships, but they still have to touch that extra vessel in order for them to be affected by it. Well, I'll explain that a little bit better in a few moments. And the only other time you can affect multiple ships with 1 source of attack with blast markers is when ships are overlapping their bases. Which I'm going to put a pin in that one for a moment to discuss a little bit about how blast markers affect a vessel, and then we'll go back to that. Now, a vessel who has a blast marker touching its base, the entire base is affected by it for the purposes of leadership checks, weaponries that are affected by blast markers, and movement. So, a ship with a blast marker on its left that wants to fire at its right, it still has to take any modifiers for that blast marker. Even though it's on the left, it affects the whole base. Ships that are moving away from a blast marker, so it's behind them or it's next to them and they're not actually physically moving through the blast marker, still count as if they are moving through the blast marker for all purposes of how a blast marker affects ships in the movement phase. So basically, no matter where the blast marker is, the entire base is affected. And with ships that are overlapping a vessel that's coming into contact with a blast marker, they too are affected by the blast marker. There's no limit to how many vessels a single blast marker can affect. However, it can only affect vessels who overlap the original base in contact with the blast marker. It can't daisy chain down a line of them. As a visual aid to better explain this, we have these three ships. Ship A's got a blast marker touching it, Ship B is overlapping that vessel, and Ship C is overlapping Ship B's base. Ship B overlapping Ship A is affected by the blast marker. Ship C is not, because it's not touching Ship A, it's touching Ship B. The only way Ship C could be affected is if its base is overlapping Ship A's base as well. And I specifically stress on ships overlapping because ships that come in contact with a ship whose base is touching a blast marker are not affected by the blast marker unless the blast marker physically touches them. Basically, the blast marker doesn't turn the base into a blast marker. So in this example, we have two ships, the blast marker is touching Ship A, and Ship B is in contact, not overlapping, contact with Ship A. Ship B doesn't count as being affected by the blast marker because the blast marker is only touching Ship A. In order for the blast marker to affect both of them, the blast marker has to physically be touching both their bases. So, what do blast markers actually do? They have the following effects on a vessel. In the movement phase, they reduce a ship's movement by 5. So, like we were discussing in the movement phase, this is one of those cases where a ship may be forced to not go its maximum distance or half its distance, and it just has to go as far as it can, because it's crippled, which for battleships is really bad because most battleships have a movement of 20 centimeters. So if it gets crippled, that movement becomes 15, and if it's touching a blast marker, the movement goes down to 10, the ship can't turn anymore because it can't move the 15 that's required, unless you burn retros to get the free turn before it moves. In cases of a ship that can't slow down, so for argument's sake, all ahead full, where it says you have to move maximum distance, if the blast marker is in the last 5 centimeters of the ship's movement, then the ship stops at right in front of the blast marker. That's the only time a all-ahead full vessel wouldn't go its maximum distance, is if a blast marker prevents it from hitting its last 5 centimeters. If a ship with 0 shields, for example, a Eldar vessel or a ship under the shield collapse critical effect, moves through a blast marker, it rolls the d6, and on a roll of a 6, it suffers a point of damage. Now, no matter how many blast markers it goes through, it only makes this roll once. And ordnance that come in contact with a blast marker also take damage on a roll of a d6, which effectively blows them up, which we'll get into the ordnance markers later on in another video series. But just to make note, if they move through an ordnance marker, if the ordnance marker moves through a blast marker, you roll a d6. On a 6, it's removed from the table. In the shooting phase, it affects the gunnery table, as we did discuss in earlier when we were talking about weapon batteries. The column shift to the right for a blast marker being in the way. This applies if there's a blast marker between the two of the ships, or if the vessel that's being targeted is in contact with a blast marker, even if it's on the other side of the vessel. Doesn't matter. Like we said, blast marker affects the whole vessel. So in this example here, The Tyrant class vessel wants to shoot at the Chaos vessel, but there's a blast marker in the way. Well, it now suffers a column shift to the right because of that blast marker. Or, if the blast marker is in contact with the ship in any way, shape, or form, doesn't matter if it's here or here, it suffers a column shift because of the blast marker. The only way that blast marker is not going to affect the vessel is if it's all the way out here. And that's right, that also means if that blast marker was touching the Tyrant class, it would affect its shooting as well. And as we discussed earlier in this video, blast markers in contact with a ship reduces its shield by 1. So now we get into probably the most dangerous part about the shooting phase, and that is catastrophic damage. When a vessel is reduced to 0 hit points, there's a chance that bad things can happen. In the case of escorts, when they're reduced down to 0 hit points, you simply remove them from the field and place a blast marker where they were to represent the ship exploding. In the case of capital ships and cruisers, you would take 2d6, total up the results together, and consult the catastrophic table to see exactly what happens to the vessel. It could be something as mundane as being turned into a Hulk, or be something as catastrophic as basically causing a temporary warp rift that just destroys everything in its path. In cases of regular Hulks and Blazing Hulks, those count as line of sight blocking terrain for the purposes of firing. So any fire that crosses its base, the ship blocks the shots. It's because of all the gas venting from the vessel or just small debris clouds that are following the vessel in its wake. So they will count as blocking line of sight. When they are attacked by like bombers or torpedoes, they count as having 0 turrets and 0 shields. So effectively, you don't have to worry about any defenses when attacking Hulks. And when it comes to attacking Hulks, you cannot attack friendly Hulks and you cannot board friendly Hulks in an attempt to deny victory points to the opponent. Opponents are allowed to fire at enemy Hulks, but they can't fire on their own. Friendly ordnance can still hit a friendly Hulk, but you can't deliberately fire torpedoes in such a way that would intentionally get the Hulk hit by the torpedoes. When a Hulk gets attacked, you roll against its armor as normal, and then you roll a single catastrophic roll on the catastrophic table. It's not one for every hit, so a wave 6 of torpedoes or 4 lance shots and all 4 hit, doesn't matter the number of hits, it just makes one roll on the catastrophic table. And also, ships that explode, the explosion counts as an area effect, so holofields and similar mechanics cannot protect against it, though shields still function as normal. And when you remove a vessel that has exploded, you would take it off the field, place the blast marker down where the center of the base was, and then any additional blast markers you're told to put down would go in a circle around that initial blast marker. And that concludes the shooting phase. So we went over quite a bit, and I know there may be some parts that are a little confusing, so if you have any questions, once again, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to answer them. And when we get back, we're going to go into the next phase of the game, which is the ordnance phase. So, thank you all for watching, and until next time, fearless gamers, take care.